I was born during a year when the hills cracked open from thirst. No one remembers the exact day, only that the goats stopped giving milk around the same time. In our village, dates didn't matter. Survival did. I was the third mouth my parents hadn't planned for, and the first girl. Our house was built from stone stacked more out of hope than skill. Wind slipped through every gap. At night, my mother slept half awake, guarding the grain jar like it was another child. Hunger taught me discipline before words ever did. By the time I was 11, I worked like a grown woman. Grinding grain before sunrise. Carrying water that bowed my spine. Listening more than speaking. Girls who spoke too much caused trouble. Trouble cost food. When my body changed, everything else followed. Blood marked the end of my childhood. Not with celebration. With calculation. Women whispered. Men stopped meeting my eyes. My father grew silent, spending long evenings staring at the hills as if answers might rise from the dust. Drought had stripped our land bare. Debt pressed against us like a hand on the throat. And I, without meaning to, had become a solution. No one asked what I wanted. The decision was settled before I understood what was being taken from me. A man from the city wanted another woman in his household, not a wife, not a name, just someone quieter, easier to replace. Sacred phrases were spoken to dress the act in righteousness, but they meant nothing beside the cold sound of silver being counted into my father's hands. That morning, my mother collapsed into tears. She clutched me tightly, her sobs breaking against my neck as if she could hold me in place by force alone. I tried to stay still, but my own chest tightened and my breath fractured. Tears slid down my face without permission. I cried silently at first, then harder, unable to stop, my fingers digging into her clothes as if that might keep the world from pulling me away. My father stood nearby, unmoving. His head remained bowed, eyes fixed on the dirt, as though looking at me would undo him. He said nothing. He never looked up. The journey took 2 days. Long enough for fear to settle into certainty. The cart creaked across stone roads and through valleys heavy with olive trees. I watched shepherd boys laughing, unaware of how fragile their freedom was. Each village smelled the same: animals, smoke, oil. Life continuing, indifferent. The estate stood apart from everything else. Thick walls. Overflowing storehouses. Order carved into stone. Servants moved like shadows, trained not to notice, not to feel. The first woman I saw was his wife. She didn't speak. Didn't blink. Just looked at me long enough to understand what I was, and then turned away. That silence followed me for years. They gave me a sleeping space barely wider than my body. Clothes that once belonged to someone else. Instructions spoken without emotion. Obedience. Discretion. Fertility. I wasn't enslaved, they said. But I wasn't free either. Days became labor. Endless, grinding labor. My hands hardened. My back ached. My name disappeared. I learned how to walk without sound. How to lower my eyes. How to exist without leaving a mark. It happened without warning, folded into the night like it had always been waiting for me. A servant appeared at my door and spoke my name softly, as if volume might invite mercy. No explanations followed. Oil lamps were already burning, their light kept deliberately low. Heavy curtains were drawn shut, sealing the room from the rest of the house. The air felt smaller inside. The wife lingered at the threshold, adjusting the lamp with careful hands, her presence a quiet reminder of where authority lived. Then she turned away and left me standing alone. I didn't know where to place my hands. I didn't know whether to sit or stand. My breath came shallow, uneven, as if my body was trying to disappear before anything could begin. By the time the lamps were extinguished, something inside me had gone silent. In that silence, I understood the truth with brutal clarity. I had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. I was no longer someone who belonged to herself. I existed only for what I could provide. And from that night on, I was officially a concubine. Time moved differently after that. My body became something counted, not cared for, tracked by women who measured worth in missed days. When the bleeding didn't come, the air around me shifted. Bowls filled a little more. Voices lowered. Hands lingered longer on my arms and stomach. I was no longer unseen. I was being watched. That night, alone on my mat, I pressed my face into the cloth and cried without sound. Not from happiness. From fear. From knowing that whatever grew inside me now mattered more than I ever had. My tears soaked into the floor before anyone noticed I was awake. Pregnancy was not a blessing. It was a gamble. Labor came like a storm that refused to pass. I bit down on cloth to keep my screams from echoing through the walls while older women whispered prayers they had used too many times before. My body shook. My voice broke. When the night finally loosened its grip, pain gave way to a single sharp cry. A boy. For a moment, I believed I had secured safety. I was wrong. I had only extended my usefulness. My son grew beneath careful rules. He was acknowledged, never embraced. Allowed, never claimed. The wife's child, born later, was celebrated before he could even walk. Everyone knew which bloodline mattered. When mistakes happened, my name carried them. When another girl arrived, thin, frightened, younger than I had been, I was told to teach her how to survive. I looked at her hands shaking and saw my own past standing in front of me. That's when I understood, I had never been special. I was temporary. Years folded into each other. My son became careful. Too careful. He learned when to speak and when silence kept him safe. He worked harder than others for half the reward. When the master died, the law spoke clearly. The wife's son inherited the future. Mine received what remained. No one called it cruelty. They called it order. In my final years, I trained girls whose names I never learned. I served guests who never asked mine. I watched prosperity bloom around me while I slowly disappeared inside it. Sometimes, I caught my reflection in polished bronze and searched for the girl who once ran barefoot over dry hills. She never looked back. When I died, there was no mourning. The household continued. Sons grew. Land expanded. History remembered the men. I was never recorded. Not because my life lacked meaning, but because the world I lived in was built to erase it. This was the life I was given. Not chosen. Not honored. Simply used. And then replaced.